Look at her. 27 years old and so desperate she married a vagrant. Ariana Brennan kept her eyes fixed on the dirt beneath her knees while her mother's voice sliced through the village square. The entire population of Ravenglen had gathered to witness her humiliation, their faces a mixture of pity and satisfaction. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Nothing good in her life had ever been allowed to last. "Tell them," Cordelia demanded, circling her daughter like a wolf preparing for the kill. "Tell them how you gave yourself to a drifter who showed up 3 months ago with nothing but threadbare clothes and a tired horse. How you disgraced this family by binding yourself to him under the moon without permission, without witnesses, without even telling your own mother." The whispers erupted immediately, hand-fasting, the old way. Primitive and binding, recognized by wolf law, but scorned by civilized society. Ariana felt heat crawl up her neck, but she refused to give her mother the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She'd learned long ago that tears only made Cordelia sharper, crueler. "Where is this mountain man of yours?" someone called from the crowd. "Did he run when things got complicated?" But then the gathered wolves began to part, and Ariana's heart stuttered. She knew his footsteps, steady, unhurried, carrying a weight that seemed to bend the air around him. Darren moved through the hostile crowd with his shoulders squared, his long blonde hair pulled back with a leather cord, his weathered face showing no fear despite being surrounded by people who wanted him gone. He looked every inch the wandering hunter they believed him to be. Worn leather vest, simple boots, calloused hands. To anyone watching, he was nobody. A man with nothing to offer except labor and empty promises. But when his pale blue eyes found hers, Ariana saw something that made her chest ache. She saw the man who'd fixed her roof without asking for payment, who'd carried water when her hands bled from the rope, who'd sat with her by firelight and made her laugh for the first time in years. She saw the man who'd made her feel human again. "So you came back," Cordelia said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "I expected you to be halfway to the next village by now. That's what men like you do when the fun ends, isn't it?" Darren didn't answer immediately. He walked straight to where Ariana knelt and extended his hand to her. "Get up. You don't kneel for anyone." She stared at his outstretched hand, scarred from work, strong, steady, and felt something crack open inside her. Slowly, she placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. The crowd murmured, sensing this wasn't going according to plan. "I came to speak with you about your daughter," Darren said, turning to face Cordelia. His voice carried an authority that seemed out of place coming from a man in borrowed clothes. "Though I see you've decided public shame is more appropriate than private conversation." "Public disgrace deserves public consequences," Cordelia snapped. "You seduced my daughter. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We were hand-fasted 4 nights ago under the full moon with the old words spoken. I understand that's not how things are typically done here. But where I come from, the moon's blessing matters more than a village elder's signature." The whispers intensified. Hand-fasting was ancient, rarely practiced except in the most remote territories. It was legally binding among wolves, but considered barbaric by modern standards. "Where you come from," Cordelia repeated mockingly. "And where exactly is that? You've been here for months without telling anyone your history, your family, or why a man your age wanders alone. For all we know, you're a criminal. A deserter." Darren's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I'm neither. I'm simply a man who recognized something worth protecting when he found it." "Worth protecting." Cordelia laughed, and the sound was ugly. "My daughter is a burden I've tried to be rid of for years. She's plain, she's old, and she has no value because her father's failures bankrupted this family before she could even understand what that meant. You call her worth protecting because you're desperate, not because she has any actual worth." Ariana felt the words hit like physical blows, even though she'd heard variations of them her entire life. But then Darren did something unexpected. He kept her hand in his and spoke directly to her parents with quiet steel in his voice. "I have no family here to negotiate with, and I understand that makes this arrangement unusual. But I'm asking you formally. I want Ariana as my wife. I'll provide for her, protect her, and give her the respect she deserves. That's more than she's received under your roof." "You have nothing," Cordelia spat. "I have enough. And what I lack in possessions, I make up for in recognizing her value when everyone else in this village seems determined to convince her she has none." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Ariana's father, Rowan, finally spoke from the edge of the crowd, his voice rough. "If you take her with nothing. No dowry, no belongings except what she's wearing. We're done with her." "Done," Darren agreed without hesitation. "And when you abandon her," Cordelia added viciously, "don't come crawling back. She made her choice. She'll live with the consequences." She won't need to come back," Darren said. And there was something in his tone now. Something that made several people take an involuntary step backward. "Because I don't abandon what's mine." The way he said mine sent a shiver through Ariana that had nothing to do with fear. Some instinctive part of her, the part that was more wolf than woman, responded to that declaration with recognition. But she couldn't understand why this stranger felt more like home than the house where she'd been raised. Not yet. 3 months earlier, the throne room of Eldrian was carved from mountain stone and illuminated by torches that had burned for 3 centuries. Kaelin Dravemont stood at the head of the obsidian council table, listening to the same argument he'd been hearing for a decade. "Your Majesty, you're 42 years old," Lord Garrett said, his gray beard quivering with frustration. "The bloodline must continue. If something happened to you—" "Death comes for everyone eventually," Kaelin interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made arguments die in people's throats. "It can wait." "But the kingdom cannot," Lady Marin interjected diplomatically. "The lesser packs grow restless. They see a king without a Luna, without heirs, and they wonder if perhaps the old bloodline has run its course." Kaelin's pale blue eyes, the color of winter ice, swept across the assembled counselors. They meant well. They genuinely believed marriage would stabilize the realm. What they didn't understand was that his wolf had never responded to any female they'd presented over the years. He wouldn't bind himself to someone his instincts rejected simply to produce heirs who'd inherit a throne built on compromise. "I understand your concerns," Kaelin said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "But I won't marry for politics. When the time is right, I'll know. Until then, Eldrian remains strong under my leadership alone." The council exchanged glances but didn't push further. They'd learned that once Kaelin decided something, arguing was wasting breath. As the meeting concluded and counselors filed out, only Thane Rorick remained, Kaelin's beta and closest friend. "You felt something 3 days ago," Thane said quietly once they were alone. "During the full moon ceremony. I saw it." Kaelin's hands gripped the table edge. Thane knew him too well. "I felt a pull, north and west. Faint, like a thread stretched too thin to follow. But it was there. A mate bond? Maybe. Or wishful thinking after decades alone." Kaelin straightened, as if he could physically shake off the sensation. "It doesn't matter. I have more immediate concerns." "The border situation." "Exactly. 3 villages reported strange movements. Wolves passing through without seeking permission. And now rumors say Alpha Darius is allowing human hunters onto his territory. That violates the Treaty of 5 Territories." Thane's expression darkened. "If he's made a pact with hunters, I need to see it myself. But if I arrive with a royal escort, everyone will perform for me. They'll hide what they're doing and feed me carefully constructed lies." Kaelin moved to the window overlooking the mountain range his family had ruled for centuries. "I need to go alone. See what's really happening without anyone knowing who I am." That's dangerous. Then you'd make an excellent king in my place, Kaelin said dryly. But nothing will happen. I'll disguise my scent, dress like a commoner, travel as a wanderer. People talk freely around those they consider beneath them. I'll learn more in a week as nobody than in a month making official visits. Thane was quiet, then nodded reluctantly. When? Tomorrow night. I'll announce the ritual of Silent Moon, a month of spiritual isolation to commune with ancestors. It's ancient tradition. No one questions it. Kaelin turned to face his beta. You'll run things here. Send coded messages to the safe houses along northern routes. If there's emergency, you know how to reach me. And if you find your mate while playing commoner? Kaelin laughed hollowly. The odds are insignificant. That pull could have been from anywhere. It's probably nothing. But even as he said it, his wolf stirred restlessly, and Kaelin knew he was lying to himself. The afternoon sun hung low when Kaelin, now calling himself Darren, first saw her. He'd been in Ravenglen less than an hour, long enough to stable his horse and ask about work. The village was exactly what his reports described: poor, isolated, quietly desperate, the kind of place where extra hands wouldn't be questioned. He was heading toward the general store when he saw a woman struggling with 2 wooden buckets, water sloshing with each step. She had long brown hair braided practically, wore a dress mended so many times the original fabric barely showed, and her face was flushed from exertion. There was determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who'd learned to carry heavy burdens alone. Something inside him went absolutely still. His wolf, dormant for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have it fully awake, suddenly surged forward with intensity that nearly staggered him. The iron collar around his neck, enchanted to block his alpha aura and royal scent, kept the outward signs hidden. But inside, every instinct screamed at him to go to her, take those buckets from her hands, position himself between her and whatever had put shadows in her brown eyes. He couldn't explain it. She was nobody, a village woman in worn clothes struggling with basic chores. But his wolf didn't care about logic. His wolf saw her and recognized something fundamental that transcended sense. Mate. The word resonated through him like a bell struck, and Kaelin realized the faint pull he'd felt during the full moon hadn't been imagination. It had been this. It had been her. He watched as she set the buckets down, shook out her arms, flexed her hands. Even from distance, he could see red marks the rope handles left on her palms. She picked up the buckets again, took a breath, continued walking. Kaelin followed. He caught up at the village edge where the road turned toward shabby cottages. Those look heavy. Can I help? She startled, nearly dropping the buckets, and turned with wide eyes. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, mid-20s, though weariness made her seem older. Her eyes were dark brown, flecked with gold, studying him with immediate suspicion. I don't need help. Thank you. I'm sure you're capable, Kaelin replied easily. But capable doesn't mean you have to struggle when someone's offering. I'm new here, just arrived. Figured I'd do a good deed before asking around for work. She hesitated, glancing at her reddened palms, then back at him. You're looking for work? Farm labor, repairs, anything honest? Name's Darren. Ariana, she said after a moment. Then, reluctantly, if you're going to be working around here, you might as well know where the Brennan house is. These are headed there. She let him take the buckets. Kaelin was careful to show appropriate effort, a normal man carrying heavy load. The truth was, he could carry 4 times this without breaking sweat, but revealing that would raise questions he couldn't answer. They walked in silence. Kaelin found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the way she moved, her breathing rhythm, the faint lavender and wood smoke scent clinging to her clothes. His wolf was howling inside, demanding he say something, do something, claim what was his. But Kaelin had survived 42 years by being patient, by thinking ahead, by never showing his hand until certain of outcome, So instead of following instinct, he simply walked beside her and waited. "This is it," Ariana said as they approached a weathered cottage with sagging roof. The yard was overgrown, chickens pecking listlessly at hard dirt. Kaylin set the buckets down, taking in the structure with practiced eye. The roof needed repairs. Windows were cracked. The whole building leaned slightly, as if exhausted. "Thank you," Ariana said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "That was kind." "It was nothing." Kaylin glanced up at damaged thatch. "That roof needs replacing before winter. The frame underneath is probably rotted." She followed his gaze and sighed. "I know. I've been trying to save enough to hire someone, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Thank you again." She picked up the buckets and started toward the door, clearly ending the conversation. But Kaylin spoke before thinking better of it. "I could fix it. The roof, if you'd like." Ariana turned back, confusion clear. "I don't have money for repairs." "I'm not asking for money. I need to build reputation if I want steady work. Doing good job where people can see it. That's worth more than coins." It was reasonable explanation. Practical. The kind of thing a traveling laborer might genuinely offer. But the truth was simpler. His wolf wouldn't let him walk away. Ariana studied him, wariness and hope warring in her expression. "Why would you help me specifically?" "Because you're mine," his wolf snarled. "Because I've waited my entire life to find you." But Kaylin couldn't say that. So he shrugged and offered truth that was close enough. "You look like someone who's been carrying heavy things alone for too long. Figured maybe it's time someone helped." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe disbelief that anyone would notice. Before she could respond, a harsh voice called from inside. "Ariana, where have you been? Those buckets were supposed to be here an hour ago." The warmth drained from Ariana's face, replaced by resigned exhaustion. "I need to go. But thank you for the offer." She hurried inside, door closing with soft thud that sounded like prison cell locking. Kaylin stood in the yard for a moment longer, listening to raised voices inside. Woman berating, girl apologizing, familiar sounds of someone being made small by people who should cherish her. His hands clenched at his sides. The iron collar suddenly felt suffocating, and his wolf raged against the magical suppression. Every instinct demanded he go inside, show them what he truly was, make them kneel before his mate, and beg forgiveness for every cruelty they'd ever inflicted. But he couldn't. Not yet. The mission required secrecy, and revealing himself now would accomplish nothing except satisfying his anger. So instead, Kaylin turned and walked back toward the village center, already planning his next move. He'd fix that roof. He'd find reasons to be near her. And slowly, carefully, he'd earn her trust. Not as a king demanding loyalty, but as a man offering something she'd clearly never received, genuine care without conditions attached. The days that followed fell into pattern. Kaylin arrived at the Brennan cottage each morning with borrowed tools and began repairs. Ariana watched him warily at first, as if waiting for him to demand payment or reveal ulterior motives. But he simply worked, replacing rotted thatch, reinforcing beams, fixing shutters that hadn't closed properly in years. She brought him water at midday. At first she'd set the cup down and leave quickly, but gradually she began to linger. They'd exchange a few words about the weather, the repairs, inconsequential things that somehow felt significant. Kaylin learned that she was 27, that her family's clan had fallen into poverty when her father's merchant business collapsed, that she'd been caring for her younger siblings and managing the household since she was barely more than child herself. He learned that she loved reading but rarely had time for it, that she found peace in the forest when she could escape there, that she had small kindnesses hidden inside her like seeds waiting for right soil. And with each conversation, his wolf settled deeper into certainty. This wasn't just attraction or even simple mate recognition. This was the other half of his soul, hidden in the last place anyone would think to look. After the roof was finished, he found other work around the village. He helped the blacksmith, repaired fences, chopped wood for elderly wolves who could no longer manage heavy labor. Ravenglen began to accept his presence, seeing him as harmless drifter willing to work for food and shelter. And every evening, he found excuse to walk past the Brennan cottage. Sometimes Ariana would be outside, tending the small garden or hanging laundry. They'd talk for a few minutes, conversations growing gradually longer, her wariness slowly transforming into something that looked almost like friendship. It was during one of these evening conversations, 6 weeks after he'd arrived, that Kalen made his mistake. Or perhaps it wasn't mistake at all. Perhaps it was simply inevitability catching up with him. They were sitting on the rickety porch steps, watching twilight paint the sky purple and gold. Ariana had just told him about a book she'd read years ago, a romance about a warrior who fell in love with a healer, and there was wistfulness in her voice that made his chest ache. "Do you believe in that?" he asked quietly. "In love that transforms people?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I used to. When I was younger, I believed someone would come and see past all the things my family sees. The failures, the disappointments, the fact that I'm too old now and too poor and too—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "But that's children's thinking. Real life doesn't work that way." "What if it does?" Kalen turned to look at her, and something in his carefully maintained composure cracked. What if someone already sees past all that? What if someone looks at you and sees strength instead of failure, resilience instead of disappointment, worth instead of burden? Ariana's breath caught. "Darren, I know I'm nobody," he continued, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know I have nothing to offer except work and whatever protection a wanderer can provide. But I see you, Ariana. I see who you actually are, not who they've convinced you you're supposed to be." The air between them felt charged, electric. Ariana stared at him with wide eyes, her hands trembling slightly where they rested on her knees. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you care about someone like me?" "Because you're my mate. Because my wolf recognized you the moment I saw you. Because every instinct I possess is screaming that you're meant to be mine." But Kalen couldn't say any of that. So instead, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her hand with his. "Because caring about you is the easiest thing I've done in years." They sat like that as darkness fell around them, hands touching, something profound and terrifying building between them. And when Ariana finally stood to go inside, she looked back at him with expression that held equal parts hope and fear. "Good night, Darren." "Good night, Ariana." But they both knew something had shifted. Something irrevocable had been set in motion, and there was no going back now. The week after that twilight conversation changed everything. Ariana found herself watching for Darren's arrival each morning with something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. He'd finished the roof work, but kept finding reasons to return. A loose shutter that needed fixing, firewood that needed splitting, a garden fence that had finally collapsed after years of threatening to do so. But Kalen wasn't just playing at being a handyman. Every repair he made positioned him closer to the information he needed. While working on Ariana's fence, he overheard conversations between passing wolves about strange scents in the northern woods. While chopping wood for the elderly widow 2 cottages down, he learned that hunters had been spotted near the border 3 times in the past month, far more than usual for this season. At night, he documented everything in coded notes that he passed to traveling merchants, who carried them to safe houses along the trade routes. From there, ravens would fly the messages to Thane at the palace. The system was slow but secure, and Thane's responses confirmed what Kalen suspected. Alpha Darius was involved, but the extent remained unclear. The mission required patience, but his wolf was growing increasingly restless, torn between duty and the mate bond pulling him toward Ariana with magnetic force. The iron collar blocked her recognition of what he was, what they were to each other. and watching her remain oblivious to the connection tearing through him was its own special torment. 2 months into his stay in Ravenglen, Kalen finally got the break he needed. He'd taken work with a trader heading north to deliver goods to the border villages, using the opportunity to scout the territories where rogues had been spotted. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Meeting sites where both wolf and human scents mingled, silver weapon fragments left carelessly behind, and territorial markers that had been deliberately obscured. Darius wasn't just allowing hunters access. He was coordinating with them, facilitating meetings between human mercenaries and rogue wolves who wanted to destabilize the established pack structure. The alliance was still forming, still fragile, but if left unchecked, it could spread like poison through all the northern territories. Kalen needed more time to identify all the players involved, to understand the full scope before he could dismantle it, which meant maintaining his disguise longer than he'd initially planned, which meant deepening his deception with Ariana, even as his feelings for her became increasingly real. The gossip started around the 10th week. Ariana heard it first at the village well, where 2 women fell silent when she approached. Then at the market, in whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. Her sister Lydia appeared at the cottage 3 days later, her expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed satisfaction. "Mother's heard the rumors," Lydia said without preamble. "About you and the drifter." Ariana's hand stilled over the bread dough she'd been kneading. "There's nothing to hear. He's helped with repairs. We talk occasionally. That's all." "That's not what people are saying." Lydia examined her nails with studied casualness. "They're saying you're spending inappropriate amounts of time with a man who has no family, no property, and no prospects. It looks desperate, Ariana." The word hit exactly as intended. Desperate, as if her loneliness was so pathetic that even accepting friendship was cause for shame. "He's been kind to me," Ariana said quietly. "I won't apologize for that." "Kind." Lydia's laugh was sharp. "Men aren't kind without expecting something in return. And when you're 27 and unmarried, people assume they know what that something is." After Lydia left, Ariana stood alone in the cottage and felt the familiar weight of judgment settling over her shoulders. But beneath it, something new stirred, a quiet defiance. For the first time in her life, someone saw value in her, and she refused to let the village's poisonous gossip destroy that. Kalen heard about Cordelia's reaction from the blacksmith, whose wife was friends with one of the Brennan neighbors. Apparently, Ariana's mother was livid, calling it a disgrace, and demanding Ariana end whatever inappropriate association existed between them. He found Ariana that evening in the small garden behind her family's cottage, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. She didn't look up when he approached, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the redness around her eyes that suggested recent tears. "Your mother spoke to you," he said quietly. "My mother has many opinions about my life." Ariana yanked out another weed, most of them unfavorable. Kalen crouched beside her, close enough to speak without being overheard if anyone was watching from the house. "I can stay away, if that would make things easier for you. I don't want to cause you more pain." Ariana's hands finally stilled. She looked at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Do you want to stay away?" "No," he admitted. "But what I want isn't what matters here." "Why doesn't it matter?" Her voice rose slightly. "Why is everyone else's opinion more important than what either of us actually feels?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said. Kalen could feel his wolf straining against the magical suppression of the collar, demanding he claim her, mark her, make the bond visible to everyone watching. But he held back, because rushing this would solve nothing. Instead, he reached out and covered her dirt-stained hand with his. "It doesn't matter," he said firmly. "Not to me. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. If I stay, if we continue spending time together, the gossip will get worse. Your family will push harder. The village will judge you more harshly. I can handle their opinions, but you shouldn't have to suffer for my presence." Ariana looked down at their joined hands. "What if I told you their judgment is nothing compared to the loneliness I felt before you arrived? What if I said I'd rather face their cruelty with you beside me than face their pity alone?" Kaylin's chest tightened. "Then I'd say you're braver than anyone in this village deserves." She smiled, small and fragile, but genuine. "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid." They stayed like that as twilight deepened around them, two people choosing each other, despite the world's determination to keep them apart. And Kaylin knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened with his mission, whatever consequences came from revealing the truth, he would never regret this moment. The confrontation came during the 11th week, exactly as Kaylin had anticipated it would. He'd just returned from another scouting trip to the northern boundaries when he heard shouting from the direction of Ariana's cottage. By the time he reached the scene, a crowd had already gathered in the yard. And here, we return to where our story began. Cordelia stood in the center of the gathered villagers, her face flushed with theatrical outrage, while Ariana knelt in the dirt at her feet. The position was deliberately humiliating, a daughter prostrating herself before a mother's judgment, a public demonstration of shame designed to break whatever spirit Ariana had managed to salvage. "Look at her," Cordelia announced to the crowd. 27 years old and so desperate she married a vagrant. The words hit Kaylin like physical blows, but not because of the insult to him. Because of what they revealed. Ariana had already told them. Had already chosen him, despite knowing what that choice would cost. "Tell them," Cordelia demanded, circling her daughter. "Tell them how you gave yourself to a drifter who showed up 3 months ago with nothing but threadbare clothes and a tired horse. How you disgraced this family by binding yourself to him under the moon without permission, without witnesses, without even telling your own mother. 3 months. The timeline aligned perfectly with his arrival, with every carefully constructed lie he'd built. And now those lies were about to either save her or destroy her, depending on what he did next. The crowd whispered about hand fasting, the ancient practice, primitive but binding. Kaylin watched Ariana's shoulders tremble, watched her refuse to cry despite the cruelty being heaped upon her, and felt his wolf rage against the collar's magical restraint. "Where is this mountain man of yours?" someone called. "Did he run when things got complicated?" That's when Kaylin stepped forward, moving through the hostile crowd with deliberate calm. Every eye turned toward him, and he saw the calculation in Cordelia's expression. She'd been counting on him fleeing, had built her entire spectacle around the assumption that he'd abandon Ariana when confronted with consequences. She didn't know she was baiting a king. "I'm right here," Kaylin said, his voice carrying across the yard with natural authority. He walked straight to where Ariana knelt and extended his hand. "Get up. You don't kneel for anyone." He felt her hand tremble as she placed it in his, felt the way she leaned into his support as he pulled her to her feet. Around them, the crowd murmured, sensing this wasn't going according to anyone's expectations. "I came to speak with you about your daughter," Kaylin said, turning to face Cordelia. "Though I see you've decided public shame is more appropriate than private conversation." The confrontation unfolded exactly as it had before. Cordelia's accusations, his calm responses, the moment when he formally asked for Ariana's hand despite having no family to negotiate with, no property to offer, nothing but his word and whatever protection a wandering worker could provide. "What exactly are you offering her?" Cordelia demanded. "Respect," Kaylin said. "Partnership. A life where she's valued instead of diminished." And when he turned to Ariana, when he saw the fear and hope warring in her expression, he knew he was making a choice that would complicate everything about his mission. But he made it anyway, because some things mattered more than strategy. "If you'll have me," he said quietly, "I'd be honored to be your husband." Her yes was soft, but certain, and it changed everything. The hand-fasting ceremony 3 nights later was small and witnessed by few, but it was legal, binding, and undeniable. When Kaelin kissed his new wife under the full moon, when he felt her melt into him despite not being able to sense the mate bond the collar blocked from her awareness, he understood that he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. He'd married his mate while lying about everything he was. The weeks that followed were simultaneously the happiest and most guilt-ridden of his life. During the day, he continued his investigation, finally confirming that Alpha Darius was actively facilitating meetings between hunters and rogue wolves, planning something large-scale that would destabilize the Northern Territories. At night, he returned to their small cottage, to Ariana, to a marriage that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in his 42 years. She taught him things about himself he'd never known, that he could be gentle, that he could listen before commanding, that ruling through compassion might actually be more effective than ruling through fear. She made him want to be better, not as a king, but as a man. And with every passing day, the deception grew heavier. 2 months into their marriage, everything came to a head. Alpha Darius sent urgent word through the coded channels. He was dying. He'd figured out who Kaelin truly was, and he wanted to confess before death claimed him. Kaelin had no choice but to go. "I'll be back in 4 days," he promised Ariana, hating the lie even as he spoke it. "I promise." But when he returned from Darius's deathbed confession, returned with confirmation that the conspiracy was real and dangerous, that he'd completed his mission and now had to return to Eldrian, he found Cordelia in their cottage, poison dripping from every word. "Is it true?" Ariana asked, her voice breaking. "Have you been lying to me?" And Kaelin, who'd built an entire life on careful strategy and calculated deception, chose truth. "Yes," he said. "I've been lying." He watched her face crumble, watched the fragile trust she'd built shatter like glass. And before he could lose his nerve, before he could convince himself that maintaining the lie was somehow kinder, Kaelin reached up and removed the iron collar. The transformation was instantaneous. His alpha aura exploded outward like a supernova, flooding the cottage with power that made every wolf present drop to their knees. The dominance wasn't just strong. It was absolute, undeniable, the kind of presence that could only come from one who ruled kingdoms. Cordelia fell backward, her face draining of color. The sisters gasped. The village gossips who'd come to watch Ariana's humiliation prostrated themselves without conscious thought. And Ariana's eyes went wide as his true scent finally hit her. Cedar and winter frost and ancient power. The scent that had been hidden from her for 3 months by magic and lies. The mate bond snapped into place with devastating force, no longer blocked by the collar's enchantment. Her wolf surged forward with recognition so strong it nearly dropped her to her knees. This wasn't just attraction or even love. This was destiny, claiming her so completely she couldn't breathe through the intensity of it. "My name is Kaelin Dravamont," he said into the shocked silence. "I'm the Alpha King of Eldrian. I came here 3 months ago in disguise to investigate reports of rogues and hunters conspiring against the Northern Territories." He looked directly at Ariana, whose hand had come up to her chest as if she could physically feel the bond settling into every cell of her body. "I found evidence of that conspiracy, but I also found something I'd stopped believing existed." His voice softened. "I found my true mate, my destined Luna, and I married her before revealing the truth because I wanted her to choose me as a man, not as a king." The silence was absolute. Then Cordelia found her voice, strangled and disbelieving. "You're the king?" "Yes." Kaelin's eyes never left Ariana's face. "And your daughter, the one you called worthless, the one you treated as a burden, is the Luna Queen of Eldrian. She always was. You were just too blind to see it." Tears spilled down Ariana's cheeks. "I can feel it now," she whispered. "The bond. It's like I've been searching for you my whole life without knowing why." "The collar blocked it," Kaelin explained gently, taking a step toward her. kept you from recognizing what I felt from the first moment I saw you. I'm sorry I hid it. I'm sorry I lied. But I'm not sorry I married you before revealing the truth, because I needed you to know. My feelings have nothing to do with duty or politics. I chose you because you're mine, and I'm yours, and that was always going to be true regardless of crowns or kingdoms. Ariana let out a shaky breath, her hands fisting in her simple dress, as if anchoring herself against the overwhelming surge of recognition, desire, and belonging flooding through her. Around them, the cottage remained frozen, Cordelia pale and speechless, the sisters stunned, the gossips still on their knees. The entire world had turned upside down in the span of seconds. And then, cutting through the charged silence, a sound split the air. A howl from the northern boundary, then another, and another. Kaelin's head snapped up, his alpha instincts recognizing the pattern immediately. That wasn't a territorial dispute. That wasn't a hunt gone wrong. That was a warning call, an attack. The rogues he'd been tracking, the conspiracy he'd uncovered. It was happening. Now. Everyone get inside, Kaelin commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a king. Bar your doors. Don't come out until I give the all clear. He turned to Ariana, cupping her face in his hands. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She was still reeling from the revelations, from the mate bond overwhelming her senses, from discovering her vagrant husband was actually a king. But she looked into his eyes and saw the same man who'd carried her water buckets, who'd fixed her roof, who'd chosen her when everyone else dismissed her. Yes, she whispered. Good. He pressed a hard, quick kiss to her forehead. Stay inside, no matter what you hear. I'll come back for you. Then he was moving, striding out of the cottage with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades leading warriors into battle. And as Ariana watched him go, watched her husband transform from the gentle man she'd married into the powerful king he'd always been, she realized something profound. She'd chosen him. And now he was about to show the entire world exactly what that choice meant. The night air hit Kaelin like a physical force as he strode out of the cottage, his true alpha power no longer contained by the Iron Collar's magic. Every wolf within a mile radius could feel it now. The overwhelming pressure of dominance that marked him as something far beyond a simple alpha. He was royalty, ancient bloodline, the kind of power that bent the world around it. The howls were closer now, coming from multiple directions. A coordinated attack, just as he'd feared. The rogues and their hunter allies had chosen tonight, perhaps sensing weakness in a small village with no strong alpha to defend it. They'd made a fatal miscalculation. Ravenglen had a king. Kaelin's wolf surged forward as he shifted mid-stride, bones restructuring with practiced ease, blonde hair transforming into pale golden fur that caught the moonlight like spun silver. His shifted form was massive, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with ice-blue eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence. This was the form that had led armies, that had defended Eldrian's borders for 2 decades, that had never lost a battle. The first rogue broke through the tree line at the village's northern edge, a scarred male with wild eyes and the scent of blood already on his fur. Behind him came 3 more, then 5, then a dozen. Too many for coincidence, too organized for random violence. This was the attack Darius had warned about, the conspiracy finally showing its teeth. But they froze when they saw Kaelin. Every predator instinct they possessed screamed at them to submit or flee. The alpha standing between them and their targets wasn't just stronger. He was apex, the kind of power that rewrote the hierarchy through sheer presence. One of the rogues whimpered and immediately dropped into a submissive crouch. Kaelin didn't give them the chance to retreat. These wolves had come to slaughter innocents, to kill families in their homes, to prove that the old pack structures could be broken through fear and violence. They'd chosen this path. Now they'd face the consequences. He moved like liquid shadow, covering the distance between them in heartbeats. His jaws closed around the throat of the lead rogue before the wolf could even think to dodge, and the crack of vertebrae echoed across the village square. The others scattered, but Kaelin was already moving, herding them away from the cottages, away from the innocents cowering inside. 2 more rogues fell in quick succession, their hubris no match for centuries of battle experience. The remaining wolves finally understood what they'd stumbled into and began to retreat. But from the western edge of the village came new sounds. Human shouts. The metallic ring of weapons being drawn. The hunters. Kaelin shifted back to human form in the space between one breath and the next, standing naked in the moonlight with blood on his hands and absolute fury in his eyes. A dozen men emerged from the forest carrying crossbows, loaded with silver-tipped bolts, blades that gleamed with the telltale sheen of blessed metal, designed specifically to kill wolves. "Well," their leader said, a scarred man with calculating eyes. "Darius said there might be complications. Didn't mention the complications would include royalty." "Alpha Darius is dead," Kaelin said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. And his confession before dying implicated every single person involved in this conspiracy, including you, Marcus Holloway, former captain of the Borderlands Guard, dishonorably discharged for selling weapons to rogues. I've been tracking you for 2 months. Holloway's expression flickered, surprise, then grudging respect. "You're better informed than expected. But you're also alone, outnumbered, and standing between us and a village full of wolves who won't know what killed them until it's too late. So here's my offer. Walk away. You've got your mate secured. You've completed whatever investigation brought you here. Leave, and we'll forget this happened." "Counter-proposal," Kaelin said. "You surrender now, and I'll ensure your deaths are quick rather than letting the families of everyone you've killed decide your fates." Holloway laughed and raised his crossbow. "I was hoping you'd be difficult." The bolt flew true, aimed directly at Kaelin's heart. But he was already moving, faster than human reflexes should allow, the bolt passing through empty air where he'd been standing a fraction of a second before. His hand closed around a fallen branch, and when his alpha power poured into it, the wood hardened into something closer to steel. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. Kaelin moved through the hunters like a force of nature, disarming them with brutal efficiency, breaking bones with calculated precision. These were trained fighters, men who'd killed wolves before and expected to kill more tonight. But they'd never faced someone who'd spent 42 years learning every way a fight could unfold, who could read body language like written text, who moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted the outcome. Within minutes, half the hunters were on the ground groaning, their weapons scattered. The other half had the sense to drop their weapons and raise their hands. Holloway himself was on his knees with Kaelin's makeshift weapon pressed against his throat. "The conspiracy ends tonight," Kaelin said quietly. "Every name, every contact, every pack member who was involved. You're going to tell me everything." "And if I don't?" Holloway gasped. "Then I'll let the village decide what to do with the man who came to murder their children." Kaelin increased the pressure slightly. "Your choice." Holloway's resistance crumbled. He talked. Dawn was breaking over Ravenglen when Thane Rorick arrived with 50 royal guards, their armor bearing the silver wolf crest of Eldrian. They'd ridden through the night, summoned by the emergency signal Kaelin had sent when Darius first confessed. The sight of the Beta and the royal guard riding into the village square made the entire population emerge from their homes, despite the danger. Thane took in the scene. The dead rogues, the captured hunters bound and guarded by village volunteers, and his king standing in the center of it all wearing borrowed clothes and looking every inch the warrior he'd always been. "Your Majesty," Thane said, dismounting and dropping to one knee. Behind him, 50 guards followed suit, the synchronized movement so perfectly executed it looked like choreographed dance. The village went silent. If there had been any doubt about Kaelin's identity, any whisper that perhaps the vagrant had been lying about being king, it died in that moment. The royal guard didn't kneel for anyone except their sovereign. Kaelin clasped Thane's shoulder, pulling him to his feet. You made good time. We rode hard once we received your signal. Thane's eyes scanned his king, checking for injuries, then swept across the village. The situation? Contained. 12 rogues dead, 3 captured, 15 hunters captured, including their leader Marcus Holloway. He's been cooperative. Kaelin's tone made it clear that cooperative had required persuasion. I have names, locations, and enough evidence to dismantle what remains of the conspiracy. Alpha Darius? Dead. But he confessed before the end, sent the hunters away from his own territory. They came here instead, thinking Ravenglen would be easy prey. Kaelin's jaw tightened. They were wrong. Thane nodded. Then his attention shifted to the cottage where Ariana stood in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Even from a distance, even without being able to scent the mate bond himself, Thane could see the way his king's entire posture changed when he looked at her. The tension eased, the cold calculation warming into something almost gentle. So it's true, Thane said quietly. You found her. I found her. Kaelin's voice held something Thane had never heard before. Vulnerability, wonder, and underneath it all, absolute certainty. Thane, meet Ariana Dravamont, my wife, my mate, your Luna Queen. The title hung in the air, and Thane saw the moment it truly registered for the watching villagers. Not just the king's wife, the Luna Queen. The highest-ranking female wolf in all of Eldrian, chosen by destiny itself, bound to the king by magic and fate. The same woman they'd called worthless 3 months ago. Thane approached Ariana and dropped to one knee, his fist over his heart in the traditional gesture of fealty. Your Majesty, I am Thane Rorick, Beta of Eldrian and your humble servant. The kingdom has waited a long time for your arrival. Ariana looked overwhelmed, her hands clutching the door frame as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. But she found her voice, and when she spoke, it was steady despite her obvious shock. Please stand, Beta Thane. I'm still learning what all of this means. You'll have time, Thane assured her, rising gracefully. And assistance. The entire kingdom will support you. Movement behind Ariana caught Kaelin's attention. Cordelia had emerged from wherever she'd been hiding during the attack. Her face ashen, her earlier theatrical outrage replaced by something that looked almost like terror. Behind her came Rowan, looking 10 years older than he had the day before, and the 2 sisters, both stunned into silence. They'd witnessed everything. The battle, the royal guard. Their daughter, the one they'd called a burden, the one they'd tried to shame into submission, being addressed as royalty by warriors who would die on her command. The karma Kaelin had promised was beginning. The next hours passed in organized chaos. Thane's guards secured the prisoners, documented evidence, and began the process of transporting everything back to Eldrian for formal trials. Kaelin gave orders with the natural authority of someone who'd ruled for decades, and the village watched in awed silence as the man they'd thought was a vagrant coordinated operations with military precision. But eventually, the immediate crisis was handled, and Kaelin found himself standing in the cottage he'd shared with Ariana for 2 months, looking at the simple life they'd built together, and knowing it was over. We'll leave at midday, he told her gently. That gives you time to gather anything you want to bring, to say goodbye to anyone who matters. Ariana looked around the small cottage, at the table where they'd shared meals, at the fireplace where they'd talked through long evenings, at the bed where they'd held each other and pretended the outside world didn't exist. This was real, wasn't it? These 2 months. They were real. The realest thing in my life, Kaelin said, crossing to her and taking her hands. Everything else was deception. But what we built here, what we feel, that was never a lie. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I don't know how to be a queen. You already know how to be brave, how to be kind, how to see value in people others dismiss, That's what matters most." He brushed away a tear with his thumb. "The rest we'll figure out together." A knock at the door interrupted them. Kaelin opened it to find Rowan standing there, hat in his hands, looking smaller than Kaelin had ever seen him. "Your Majesty," Rowan said, the title awkward in his mouth. Could I speak with my daughter before you go?" Kaelin looked at Ariana, letting her decide. She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped outside, giving them privacy, and found Thane waiting with an expression that suggested he had news. "The village elders want to offer formal apology," Thane said quietly, "for the treatment of the Luna Queen. They're terrified you'll take offense and withdraw protection from Ravenglen." "Let them be terrified for a while," Kaelin said without sympathy. "They earned it. But Ravenglen will remain under royal protection, for Ariana's sake, not theirs." Inside the cottage, Ariana faced her father for the first time since learning the truth. Rowan looked at her, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Regret. "I failed you," he said simply. "Your mother. She controlled so much, and I let her. I told myself it was easier to keep the peace, but the truth is, I was a coward. I let her destroy your confidence, let her drive away any chance you had at happiness. And when you finally found someone who saw your worth, I stood by while she tried to take that away too." Ariana felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm royalty? Because suddenly I have value?" "No," Rowan's voice cracked. "Because I finally see what I should have seen all along. You've always had value. I was just too weak to protect it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This was your grandmother's. She left it to you when she died, but your mother hid it away. It's not much. Some coins, a few pieces of jewelry. But it's yours. I should have given it to you years ago." Ariana took the pouch with trembling hands. "What about Mother? Lydia? Rosalie? Do they feel this regret too?" Rowan's silence was answer enough. Some people learned from their mistakes. Others simply learned to fear the consequences. "I don't expect forgiveness," Rowan said quietly. "I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. For choosing happiness despite us. For having the courage we never gave you credit for. You're going to be an extraordinary queen." He left before she could respond, and Ariana stood alone in the cottage holding her grandmother's legacy, crying for the family she'd never had, and the father who'd finally found his voice too late to matter. By midday, the entire village had gathered to watch the Luna Queen's departure. 6 royal carriages had arrived, along with another contingent of guards and several ladies-in-waiting sent by Thane to attend to Ariana's needs. The contrast between the shabby village and the obvious wealth of the royal procession couldn't have been starker. Cordelia stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of complicated emotions. She'd lost the power to hurt Ariana, lost the ability to define her daughter's worth, lost everything that had made her feel superior. And she'd lost it all not through revenge or punishment, but through the simple fact that Ariana had found someone who saw her true value. Lydia and Rosalie stood with their husbands, both women pale and quiet. They'd spent years mocking their elder sister, had laughed at her desperation, had celebrated their own marriages as proof of their superiority. Now they watched that same sister being addressed as Your Majesty by warriors and nobles. Watched her about to enter a life of wealth and power they couldn't even imagine. The karma was silent, but devastating. No one punished them. No one even acknowledged them. They simply had to stand there and watch the sister they'd treated as worthless become something they never could be. Ariana emerged from the cottage, wearing a traveling dress provided by the royal household, simple but well made, the kind of quality she'd never worn in her life. Her hair was braided in a style befitting nobility, and a small circlet of silver rested on her head, marking her status as Luna Queen even before the formal coronation. She looked terrified and brave and beautiful. Kaelin waited beside the lead carriage, having changed into proper clothing, dark leather and fine wool, the silver wolf crest of Eldrian embroidered over his heart. He looked every inch the king now, all traces of the wandering laborer carefully erased. But when Ariana approached, his expression softened into something private and tender. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She glanced back at Ravenglen, at the cottage that had been a prison, and then briefly a home, at the family that had never valued her, at the village that had never seen her. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Kaelin helped her into the carriage, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Then he mounted his horse, a magnificent gray stallion that had been brought from Eldrian, and gave the signal to depart. As the procession began to move, Ariana looked out the carriage window one last time. She saw her father standing apart from the others, his hat still in his hands, regret written in every line of his weathered face. She saw her mother, stiff and pale, unable to meet her eyes. She saw her sisters whispering to each other, their earlier smugness replaced by something that looked almost like envy. And she saw the village elders, all of them bowing deeply as the carriage passed, showing the respect they'd never shown when she was simply Ariana Brennan, the eldest daughter no one wanted. The karma was complete. They hadn't been punished. They hadn't been destroyed. They simply had to live with the weight of knowing they'd thrown away something precious. And by the time they realized its value, it was already gone. As Ravenglen disappeared behind the trees, Ariana felt something shift inside her. The old Ariana, the one who'd believed she was worthless, who'd accepted cruelty as her due, who'd never dared to hope for more, was being left behind with the village. What moved forward was someone new, someone who'd been chosen by destiny, claimed by a king, and revealed to have worth she'd never been allowed to see. She was Ariana Dravamont now, Luna Queen of Eldrian, and her real story was only just beginning. The journey to Eldrian took 3 days, and with each mile they traveled, the landscape transformed. The poor, struggling territories of the borderlands gave way to prosperous farmlands, then to rolling hills dotted with thriving villages, and finally to the mountains themselves, ancient, imposing, beautiful in their harsh grandeur. Ariana spent most of the journey in the carriage, watching the world change outside her window while trying to process everything that had happened. Kaelin rode alongside her carriage during the day, occasionally stopping to check on her, to answer questions, to simply be present. At night, they stayed in royal way houses, small but well-appointed buildings maintained specifically for the king's travels, and he would hold her while she trembled with anxiety about the future rushing toward them. "What if they don't accept me?" she asked on the second night, curled against his chest in the darkness. "What if the council sees me as you did, as a poor village woman with nothing to offer?" "Then they'll learn the same lesson Ravenglen learned," Kaelin said firmly. "That judging someone by their circumstances rather than their character is the fastest way to reveal your own limitations." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Besides, you're not just anyone. You're my mate. Destiny chose you, not politics or strategy or careful negotiation. The council will have to accept that." But what if I fail?" The fear in her voice was raw, honest. "What if I don't know how to be what they need?" "Then you'll learn, the same way you learned to survive your family, to find strength when everyone told you were weak, to choose happiness despite every obstacle." He tilted her face up to look at him. "You're already stronger than most wolves I've known. You just haven't had anyone tell you that before." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate love into the connection between them. And Kaelin held her like she was the most precious thing in his kingdom, because she was. The palace of Eldrian came into view on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and Ariana's breath caught. It wasn't a single building, but rather a sprawling complex carved into the mountainside itself, with towers reaching toward the sky and walls that had stood for centuries. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffs on either side, their mist creating rainbows in the afternoon sun, and the whole structure seemed to glow with a power that was both beautiful and intimidating. "This is home," Kaylin said, riding close to her carriage window. "You're home now." Home. The word felt foreign, impossible. How could a place this grand, this ancient, ever feel like home to someone who'd grown up in a cottage with a leaking roof? But as they passed through the massive gates, guards saluting with fists over hearts, their faces showing genuine joy at their king's return, Ariana saw something that eased her anxiety slightly. The palace wasn't just a monument to power. It was alive, functional, filled with people going about their daily work. Servants hurried across courtyards, guards trained in practice yards, and somewhere in the distance she could hear children laughing. It was a home, just on a scale she'd never imagined. The carriage stopped in the main courtyard, where what appeared to be the entire palace staff had gathered. Hundreds of wolves stood in organized rows, all dressed in formal livery, all waiting to meet their new Luna Queen. Kaylin dismounted and opened the carriage door himself, extending his hand to help Ariana down. She took it, grateful for his steady presence, and stepped out into the weight of hundreds of watching eyes. "People of Eldrian," Kaylin's voice carried across the courtyard with natural authority, "I present to you Ariana Dravamont, my true mate and your Luna Queen. She comes from humble beginnings, which makes her uniquely suited to understand the struggles of all our people, not just the privileged few. I expect you to serve her as you serve me, with loyalty, respect, and unwavering dedication." The response was immediate. As one, the assembled crowd dropped to one knee, heads bowed in a gesture of absolute fealty. The synchronized movement was so perfectly executed, it looked like a wave flowing across the courtyard. "Your Majesty," they said in unison. "Welcome home." Ariana felt tears prick her eyes. Welcome home. Words she'd never heard from her own family, now offered by hundreds of strangers who owed her nothing but duty. The first council meeting happened that evening, before she even had time to properly settle into her new chambers. Kaylin had apologized for the timing, but explained that the conspiracy they'd uncovered required immediate attention, and the council needed to understand everything that had happened, including how he'd found his mate. Ariana sat beside him at the head of a long obsidian table, wearing a gown that had been hastily altered to fit her. Deep blue silk, embroidered with silver wolves, far finer than anything she'd ever touched before. Around the table sat 12 council members, their faces showing varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed shock. Lord Garrett, the elderly counselor who'd been pushing for Kaylin to marry, looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "Your Majesty, while we're grateful you've finally taken a mate, we must express concern about the circumstances. A village woman with no noble blood, no political connections, no training in governance, is exactly what this kingdom needs," Kaylin interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made Garrett fall silent. "I spent 3 months living among common wolves, seeing firsthand how our policies affect those without power or privilege. Ariana knows those struggles intimately. She understands what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. That perspective is invaluable. But Your Majesty," Lady Marin spoke carefully, "understanding hardship and governing a kingdom are vastly different skills. Perhaps the Luna Queen could benefit from extensive training before taking an active role in—" "I don't need her to benefit from anything except your respect and support." Kaylin's tone went cold. "She's my mate, chosen by destiny itself. That makes her Luna Queen, with all the authority and responsibility that entails. If any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to resign from this council." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Ariana sat perfectly still, feeling every eye on her, feeling the weight of their doubt and judgment. It was Ravenglen all over again. Being told she wasn't enough, would never be enough, needed to be fixed or hidden or changed. But then she thought about Kaelin's hand pulling her to her feet in the village square. About his voice telling her she didn't kneel for anyone. About 2 months of being valued, respected, seen. And she found her voice. "You're right to be concerned," Ariana said quietly, but clearly enough that everyone heard. "I don't have noble blood. I don't have political connections. I wasn't raised to govern." She met each council member's eyes in turn. "But I was raised to survive cruelty, to find kindness in harsh places, to see the worth in people others dismissed. And I learned that power without compassion is just tyranny wearing a crown." She took a breath, feeling Kaelin's hand close over hers under the table in silent support. "I'm not here to replace what you do or claim I know better. I'm here to learn, to serve, and to make sure this kingdom's strength includes taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. If that's not something you can accept, then perhaps His Majesty is right. Perhaps you should consider whether you're still suited for this council." The silence that followed was different. Surprised. Thoughtful. Lord Garrett's expression shifted from contempt to something that might have been grudging respect. Lady Marin actually smiled slightly. Thane, sitting at the far end of the table, caught Kaelin's eye and nodded once, a clear sign of approval. "Well," Lord Garrett said finally, "perhaps there's more to your Majesty than first appears. Time will tell." "Yes," Ariana agreed. "It will." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Ariana's life. Harder than living under her mother's cruelty. Harder than facing public humiliation. Harder than anything she'd experienced before. Because for the first time, she actually had something to lose. The palace was a maze of protocol she didn't understand, of social hierarchies she'd never learned, of expectations she couldn't meet. There were formal dinners where she used the wrong utensil and felt the noble's eyes tracking her mistake. There were audiences with visiting alphas who barely concealed their disdain for a Luna Queen without proper bloodline. There were council meetings where she understood only half the political maneuvering happening around her. And there were whispers. Always whispers. The king's little peasant. Chosen by accident, not design. She'll embarrass the kingdom sooner or later. Ariana heard them all, felt them chip away at her confidence, and fought not to believe them. But doubt was an old companion, and it knew exactly how to find the cracks in her armor. 3 weeks into her new life, she broke down sobbing in their chambers while Kaelin held her, and let her cry out all the fear and inadequacy she'd been holding inside. "I'm failing," she whispered against his chest. "I can feel them judging me, waiting for me to prove I don't belong here. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this." "You're wrong," Kaelin said firmly. "You're not failing. You're learning. There's a difference. How can you be sure?" "Because I watch you every day," he said, tilting her face up to look at him. "I watch you treat servants with the same respect you give council members. I watch you listen to petitions from common wolves and actually hear what they're saying, not just what you want to hear. I watch you find solutions others miss because you understand what it means to have nothing and need everything." He brushed away her tears with gentle thumbs. "The council wanted me to marry someone who knew how to play political games, someone who could navigate high society without making waves. But I didn't need another politician. I needed someone with a moral compass that pointed true north regardless of who was watching. I needed you. But I don't know how to be a queen," she said helplessly. "Then let me tell you a secret." Kaelin smiled slightly. "Neither did I when I first took the throne. I was 22, barely more than a boy, and suddenly I was responsible for millions of lives. I made mistakes. I failed. I learned. And eventually, I became the king Eldrian needed. Not because I was perfect, but because I refused to stop trying." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Give yourself the same grace you'd give anyone else. Learn. Grow. And trust that the reason destiny chose you isn't because you were already perfect, but because you have the capacity to become everything this kingdom needs. The turning point came 6 weeks after Ariana's arrival, during a formal audience with representatives from the smaller border packs. One of them, an older female named Elena from a pack that had been devastated by rogue attacks, was explaining the struggles her people faced when Lord Garrett interrupted with the standard response. Resources would be allocated according to established protocols, investigations would be conducted. The council would review options. It was diplomatic, proper, and completely inadequate. Ariana watched Elena's face fall, watched hope die in the woman's eyes, and felt something snap inside her. She stood, ignoring the startled looks from the council, and walked down from the dais to stand directly in front of Elena. Tell me what you actually need, Ariana said quietly. Not what sounds good in an official report. What would actually help your people right now? Elena stared at her, clearly shocked that the Luna Queen was addressing her directly. Your Majesty, we need healers. We lost ours in the attacks, and we don't have the resources to attract new ones. And we need builders. Our homes were destroyed, and winter is coming. But most of all, she swallowed hard. We need to know someone remembers we exist, that we matter. Ariana turned to look at Lord Garrett. How long would your established protocols take to deliver help? 3 to 4 months, Your Majesty, he said stiffly. We must conduct proper assessments, allocate resources appropriately. They'll be dead by then, Ariana said bluntly. Or scattered to other territories, their pack dissolved. She looked at Kaylin. We have royal healers, don't we? More than the palace actually needs? We do, Kaylin confirmed, watching her with something that looked like pride. And we have builders on staff for palace maintenance? Yes. Then we send them. Today, 5 healers, 10 builders, and enough supplies to get them through winter. Not in 3 months. Today. Ariana looked back at Elena. Will that help? Elena's eyes filled with tears. Your Majesty, that would, yes, that would save us. Then it's done. Ariana turned to the council, her chin lifted in unconscious challenge. Unless someone objects? No one did. How could they? She'd just solved a problem in 5 minutes that they'd been reviewing for months. More importantly, she'd done it by actually listening to what was needed rather than hiding behind protocol. After the audience ended, Kaylin pulled her aside, his eyes bright with something fierce and proud. Do you know what you just did? Probably violated a dozen protocols, Ariana said nervously. You led, Kaylin said firmly. You saw a problem, understood it, and implemented a solution. That's what a Luna Queen does. That's what a leader does. But the council just watched you embody exactly what I've been trying to teach them for years. That sometimes the most efficient solution is the compassionate one. He cupped her face in his hands. You're not failing, Ariana. You're transforming this kingdom one decision at a time. Word of the Luna Queen's intervention spread quickly through the palace, then through the kingdom. Other petitioners began requesting audiences specifically with her, knowing she would listen with empathy rather than just political calculation. She started implementing small changes, a fund for widowed wolves, educational programs for orphans, support systems for struggling packs. The council stopped questioning her presence and started asking her opinion. The nobles stopped whispering about her common origins and started seeking her favor. And slowly, gradually, the kingdom began to see what Kaylin had seen from the beginning. That Ariana's greatest strength wasn't despite her humble background. It was because of it. 3 months after her arrival, during the formal coronation ceremony that had been delayed while she learned and adapted, Ariana stood before the assembled kingdom, wearing a crown of silver and sapphires. Kaylin placed it on her head himself, his voice carrying across the great hall. "I present to you Ariana Dravamont, Luna Queen of Eldrian, chosen by destiny, tested by hardship, and proven through compassion. She will lead beside me not because tradition demands it, but because this kingdom deserves a Luna who understands what it means to suffer, to endure, and to rise." The applause was thunderous. And in the front rows, Ariana saw the faces of wolves she'd helped over the past months. Elena from the border pack, now healthy and smiling, the widow whose children she'd enrolled in school, the elderly wolves whose medical care she'd personally ensured. They weren't clapping out of duty. They were clapping because she'd earned their respect. That evening, alone in their chambers, Kalen pulled her close and pressed his forehead against hers. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm finally home," Ariana whispered. "Really home. Not because of the crown or the title, but because I finally found a place where I belong." "You've always belonged," Kalen said softly. "The world just needed time to catch up to what I saw from the beginning." He kissed her gently. "My Luna, my mate, my queen." And Ariana, who had spent 27 years believing she was worthless, who had been humiliated and dismissed and told she would never be enough, finally understood the truth. She had always been enough. The problem had never been her lack of worth. It had been everyone else's inability to see it. But destiny had seen. Kalen had seen. And now, an entire kingdom saw what had been there all along. A woman with the strength to endure, the wisdom to learn, and the compassion to lead. The wolf they'd called worthless had become the queen they needed, and in the end, that was the greatest justice of all.